I'm Katie Osuna, and I'm the host of Copper and Heat Radio, a 2-time James Beard Award-winning podcast about the forces that shape our meals. I started this podcast back in 2019 when I was working in Michelin-starred restaurants and noticing all of these social interactions around me. I had a lot of questions about the culture of restaurants and the systems we operated in.
I think the restaurant world's in for a reckoning.
Restaurants are slow to change because everything's made on the smallest margins.
Value is completely arbitrary, right?
What began as a podcast to process my way through working in kitchens as a woman has grown.
If the conversation is a crackdown on the border, then do you want a $30 burger? Because that's one of the consequences of this.
There's just a certain financial reality to making certain businesses exist. And there's a reason that delivery didn't exist in a lot of markets for a lot of years. And it's because it's incredibly low margin.
How a cuisine climbs in prestige and value. This happened to Japanese cuisine. This happened to Italian cuisine right in front of our eyes.
Listen wherever you get your podcasts. And now on Heritage Radio Network.
You're listening to Heritage Radio Network.
HRN is food radio supported by you. Learn more at heritageradionetwork.org. Hi, listeners. I wanted to take a moment to talk about Heritage Radio Network, the organization that produces this podcast. HRN is the only podcast network dedicated to food, beverages, and the culinary world. It's also a nonprofit that educates emerging food storytellers. HRN brings listeners free podcasts on everything from the artistry of baking to the craft of brewing, the complexities of cheesemongering to the challenges of solving climate change. And they need your help. Help HRN thrive by going to heritageradionetwork.org/donate and making a donation to keep food radio free and accessible. This is Capri Cafaro, host of Eat Your Heartland Out. This week, I'm sharing the show with 2 podcast hosts who use their microphones to amplify the stories of American agriculture. Join me in conversation with Rodger Wasson, host of Farm to Table Talk, and DiPrima, host of the One Bite is Everything podcast. Next. Rodger, thank you so much for joining Eat Your Heartland Out. It's so fun to have a fellow Heritage Radio Network host joining me today. So let's call it a co-show.
Oh, I'm all for that. Good to be here. Thanks for inviting me over. I love a conversation, and I'm looking forward to having a conversation with you today.
You and me both. For folks that are not familiar with you, I wanted to do, my best to introduce you, your work and your show, Farm to Table Talk podcast, to our audience here at Eat Your Heartland Out. So tell us a little bit about you and how you got into the podcast business.
Well, I'll try to make it quick, but it seems like it's kind of a long story. But anyway,
that's okay.
I grew up on a farm in central Illinois, and my family had been on the same farm since like 1840. And then after I went to college,
first I got to ask, what kind of farm? Illinois. I've been there. I know you grow a lot of pumpkins.
Yeah, well, actually, the pumpkin area is probably over around Morton, Illinois, and
that is correct, Morton, Illinois.
And Peoria is really the next big city that's 5 miles from Morton, and I was west of that about 20 miles in Farmington. But Morton, I'm glad you mentioned Morton and those pumpkins, because actually most of my family was Scot-Irish, but some were Germans, and the Germans came over near Morton. And they actually lived in a place called Germantown Hill, like Germantown, actually. And they all farmed. One of the farmers moved over to the other side of Peoria, and that was, one of my great-grandfathers. But they were, other than those pumpkin farmers around Morton, almost everybody had the same farm. They were all livestock farm. Nobody sold anything off the farm that didn't walk. And so you would raise your own grain and your own corn and your own oats and your own alfalfa and your own straw to bed them. And you would have hogs and cattle not so many chickens, some chickens, but not so much, and sheep. And it was a pretty good model that people could raise hogs all the time, and they could have a cow herd. And the cow herd would be in an area by some ponds or thickets and so forth that were in a little bit more rolling area than the flatland. And and occasionally, to keep busy enough when you weren't doing the crops that you had to take care of for animal feed, again, which is the only reason you'd have crops. Most of the farmers I knew didn't really care for crops very much; they just liked animals. But you would even bring in a couple truckloads of what they call Western cattle. And the Western cattle would be coming from somewhere like Montana. Mm-hmm. And oftentimes they'd be Herefords or Black Baldies, which were Angus Hereford cross, which was really what everybody preferred, is that they could get, a load of Black Baldies was great. And that would be something that you would put in the fall, and you would be feeding them mostly shelled corn and supplement, and then be able to fatten them up and send them to market. The funny thing about those Western cattle, they come in off of a semi truck, and as soon as they go down the chute, they'd break through a fence and get out into a cornfield. Everybody'd have to go running down through the cornfields trying to chase the cattle that were all chomping the cornfields down, and so it was always an adventure. And then then you'd also have cows, and sometimes those cattle, after the corn was picked, they go out and kind of go around and find more corn to get out in the fields that maybe didn't make it into the corn picker. But that was pretty much it. I mean, you could go, every direction and maybe a quarter mile to a half a mile, and you would see typically a white house with red barns, shade trees, mowed fence rows, and that's what everybody looked like, and like I say, and everybody had hogs, and most everybody had cattle, and you'd have a small sheep flock that would be taking care of some orchards. But that was, they all looked very, very, very similar. You could drive for miles and miles in every direction, and that would pretty much be the case. I went to Illinois. I was going to say,
it is clear that farming is in your blood. It's in your DNA for generations. And I've learned a lot about the lay of the land, so to speak, there in that part of Illinois. But you left the farm, but you didn't leave your commitment to agriculture behind at that point once you went to college.
No, actually, I went to Illinois State University because my girlfriend was going there. And
good enough reason as any, right?
I know. And then we got married while we were in the university, and she was a year behind me in school. So I got a job locally in Bloomington Normal and at a radio station. And first I was hired as salesman. So I was going out and selling air, which is a great way to start. What do you have to sell? I'm selling air. So I would sell air. And then the station owner said, well, you got a farm background. We had the person that was doing our farm show is leaving. Would you like to take that over too? And I said, sure. So I started having a farm show at 6:00 in the morning and also at noon and every day. And the 6:00 in the morning one I taped the night before because I didn't want to get up that early. And, I'd say things like, good morning, Kelly. And he'd say, good morning, Rodger. But he was responding live to, my comments. But I started kind of seeing the fork in the road that early. Alex, I was like, 23 or something. And then the station owner said, hey, you've got a career in broadcasting and you could be, sales manager and, all that. But on the other hand, I had this farm show and I would go on and I just loved talking for farmers because I kept thinking, these are my people. And so I really liked that best. And, at that time, I got bonuses for sales commission, but what really most impacted me was a letter I got from a woman near Bloomington, Illinois, who said, "My son's a farmer south of Bloomington, and I'm so proud that you're speaking up for farmers." And
I love that.
And it just touched me. And I thought,
and it obviously stayed with you because you're still speaking up for farmers.
Well, that's what I thought. And so at the time, I thought, gee, I have a choice here. I could keep trying to speak up for farmers, even though I'm not farming myself, or I could make money. And I thought, what's money? I think I'd rather just work for farmers. And so I thought I was making a course correction there to not pursue a career in broadcasting, but to instead try to figure out how I might be able to help farmers. And somehow, though, I know we're fast forwarding here for a minute, but somehow those two things ended up being able to coexist at some point. No, that's right. That's right. I've ended up spending, not being back on the farm, but spending my entire career connected to food and agriculture and farming. Yes. So give us a little bit of a rundown on, you have done so many things in ag and touching so many different aspects of farming and ranching in your experience professionally. I think it's important for our listeners to know just the depth and breadth of the type of organizations that you work with and some of the work that you've done. Well, I got hired to go to Denver, Colorado to be an assistant for the Sheep Industry Development Program. Mm-hmm. And it was putting together symposia and so forth. I worked with all the land-grant universities across the country and organized symposia on how to raise sheep. And then there was a farmer from Indiana that was on the board and saying, would you consider coming to Indiana from Colorado? And this was like in just a year and a half or two. And we have merged the cattle feeders and the cattlemen together into a new association, and we're interviewing for an executive director. So I went out to Indiana, and they hired me. So then I go to Indiana and work on the Cattlemen's Association, lobbied for the cattlemen, did promotions, got a checkoff program started, all of those things, and really liked it. And then I got contacted to go to Des Moines, Iowa, to be the head of operations for the National Pork Producers Council and their voluntary checkoff program at that time, promoting pork, the other white meat, and working with hog farmers, which is another story. There was more smaller farmers at that time than there are today, but that's a kind of a related story. And did that for a couple of years. And then a search firm said, the American Sheep Industry Association was at the time called the American Sheep Producers. They're looking for a CEO, and they had me come out and interview me, and I ended up becoming the CEO of that group, and then it merged with another, the National Wool Growers, and I became the first CEO of that group. And we had a team, I had merchandisers, we had an advertising program, public relations, education, research, nationwide, and even started doing a little international. And then I joined a marketing company in Boulder, Colorado, that worked with more commodities. I worked with potatoes and, several others, putting together marketing programs, doing research for those programs. And then I got one of my clients said, try to hire somebody in California because we need to get some of that California agriculture expertise. And so I was trying to recruit somebody in California to work for the Cattlemen's Association, the National Cattlemen. And they said, well, I'm not interested, but we think that our search firm should talk to you because we're looking for a CEO of the Almond Board of California. And I thought, well, I never really planned on going to California. Almonds are a very big commodity there in California. It's huge. And you really can only grow it in California. So that's another unique aspect. So anyway, I came out and they hired me to be the CEO of the Alma Board of California, and did that for 10 years. And then about the time of 9/11, I had a call from somebody who said, would you consider moving to the coast and being the president of the Strawberry Commission? And I said, sure. So, and I actually, then we were able to live near the beach and have a...
Wow. And you're still in California now, right?
I am, but then I when I left that, I started doing consulting again, and my son and my granddaughter were moving to Sacramento, so we decided let's relocate because we'd just as soon be close to a granddaughter than close to the ocean. So we reclosed. So we're in Sacramento, but the thing along the way, when I was in these more recent years, I was doing a project. I helped establish the U.S. Farmers and Ranchers Alliance and set up food dialogues.
That's massive.
Around the country, and sometimes we had all kinds of interesting things. We used the New York Times Auditorium and others to be able to put on these programs. One thing that I noticed is that there were voices in agriculture and about farm to fork, farm to table, those programs. And I found inspiring and interesting, but I didn't think they were getting much attention. So I one day said, well, if you want more of that to be heard and people that you think have a story that aren't being heard, why don't you just become your own radio?
Absolutely.
And so I just started doing a podcast.
You are speaking my language, because this is how I kind of felt about, Eat Your Heartland Out, that, a lot of aspects of Midwestern food culture were either totally overlooked or misunderstood, and conversations weren't being had. And, there was not really information, education, dialogue. And, if you see a void in a place where, you feel like there should be a voice that should be amplified, why not pick up the microphone yourself? And that sounds like exactly what you did.
Yeah, I think so. And I've heard somebody in one podcast was talking about there's three kinds of people: that people that are rooted, are people that are stuck, or people that are mobile. Now that's an overgeneralization, but it's kind of interesting because so many people I think are rooted, and in many respects, I envy them. And there's some people that are just someplace and they might consider going somewhere else, but they feel like they can't really for one reason or another. And then there's those that are fairly mobile. And it turned out, we're fairly mobile. So geographically, we've lived in Indiana, Illinois, Iowa, Colorado, California, never really set out to necessarily, but I feel kind of at home in all those areas. And I find things that are kind of interesting and what I like about the people pretty much all over the country.
Well, I mean, and maybe you can attribute that to your Midwestern roots and, that general sense of hospitality and community connection. It sounds like you find those communities and build communities wherever, wherever you are, whether it is in a new state or within a new agricultural industry. It seems like building alliances and building communities is something that you have thrived in.
Yeah. Well, and really you can find yourself in almost any of these areas. And if you can connect with those kind of people and those communities, you just feel at home. And, I remember I had my aunt Dorothy, she'd go on trips. And she was one of those people that before she left a restaurant, no matter what state she was in, she'd know something about the people that were waiting the tables. And sometimes she'd discover a long lost cousin when she just happened to stop, fill a car up with gas, or, just that nature. And I've got a couple relatives that are like that they had that sort of openness to community that was natural there in central Illinois in the rural area, but they'd take it with them. And as long as they opened up, they'd find wherever they went, the place that people would say, well, gee, they're sure not very friendly here in the big city. Well, they'd find friends. If you happen to share an elevator before it got to the top floor of the hotel, you made a new friend. If I
Yeah. Now, do you bring that kind of sentiment to, interfacing with your guests on Farm to Table Talk? I mean, I would suspect that, folks feel very welcomed when they join your table.
Well, I hope so. I try to. I think it's kind of a natural default setting. I try not to take myself all that seriously, and I think
Always a good thing.
Yeah, and the thing is that oftentimes as you get pitched by people that are publicists and PR people, and I respect them. I'm glad that they're saying, you want to talk about this book or something, and that's fine. But the thing that always slows me down is when they say, in preparation, would you give us a list of questions? And I think,
yeah,
wait a minute, what is this preparation thing? I want it to be, in fact, when I named it Farm to Table Talk, actually, what spoke to me almost more than the farm to table part of it was the table talk part of it.
Mm-hmm.
I really felt like some people, I think, are shrug off like table talk. It's like, oh, it's just kind of meaningless. How's the weather sort of thing. But, I just find it's really welcoming and helpful. And you get on a different kind of connection in a table talk environment. The fact that
Absolutely.
It's farm. Yeah, and the fact that it's farm to table to me is it's everything from growing food to eating food, or the occasion of conversations that always take place where food is a part of it.
That's right. Food is a catalyst for communication. There's no question about that. And it sounds like that again is kind of the attitude that you bring to your table talk. How do you identify, the themes that you want to approach, the guests that you want to talk to? What goes in? I mean, you say, what about this preparation? But there is preparation that goes into putting together a show, and at least generically coming up with themes and topics that you want to talk about.
Well, it's sort of, but I really wing it most of the time. When I was getting started, I thought it was important for me to pick out kind of celebrities, like the big name, and I would, great, I've got this Secretary of Agriculture and I got this and that. And the more I did it, the more I thought, you know what, almost everybody's a good story. And so sometimes I just hear somebody, or somebody tells me about someone. Oftentimes they're reaching out to me. I'm getting now where again, somebody will say, why don't you take this look at this book and maybe do a blurb or something.
Mm-hmm.
And I'll say, well, I don't need any more books, but I wouldn't mind seeing the PDF. And then I'll get the drift of somebody that's written a book, and well, that's really interesting.
Yeah.
And I think I want to schedule a conversation with them. And I have to admit, probably the way I respond to it is that I'm just curious. I want to visit with this person. I think I'll be there for it. And then coincidentally, other people might like it too. And I've found that I don't always have the same interest that a lot of my listeners, because sometimes shows get listened to more than other shows.
Yeah, you see that. Yeah.
But even the ones that aren't kind of the top of listens, they may be the top of mine, and I don't have any regrets. It's kind of like, gee, you ran this show and you didn't have as many listens as you did, downloads as you did last week. I don't care. I've decided that I'm doing it because I think there's an interesting story, and I'm really curious. And I think that curiosity comes through because I can sit down and have a conversation with people and, come away thinking, I'm better for that. I'm better for having that conversation. And if it's good for anybody else, that's great.
Well, listen, I mean, I think that is one of the great things about podcasting. It's created this kind of egalitarian opportunity to explore, different interests and ideas, and, can make new connections. And it doesn't necessarily have to be about how many listeners or how many hits. It's about following those interests and the passions of your own, and being able to do that because podcasting has become increasingly more accessible for people to make, and obviously for people to listen to as well. You've talked a little bit about what you get out of this, making the podcast, but what do you hope listeners get out of listening to the podcast? Because you do cover so many different, you talk to chefs, you talk to farmers, you talk about regenerative ag, you have this big, spectrum of the type of people and the type of topics that you touch on. So you are likely to get, people from all different walks listening in. What do you hope people get when they tune into your podcast and maybe walk away and think about what they heard?
Well, overall, I mean, I hope that everybody finds it's enjoyable, that they think that, but I love it when it turns out somebody said, gee, that gave me an idea. Or I've had people say, this didn't look like something that I'm going to find interesting. And then I hear back from them and they said, this turned out to really give me an idea. I'm glad you did it. So I feel useful. And that's really, I think, one of my biggest motivations is not trying to run a campaign or not try to get rich or not try to be something that's, super for necessarily selling books and so forth, but that somebody says, well, you know what, I was listening to that while I was mowing my yards, and but it made me think of this, and I've had that kind of feedback from people really all over the country and some international, that something would come up and saying, by the way, I don't know if you ever hear from people, but this was exactly what I needed to hear. And I thought, that's great. If there was one that got something out of it, out of everybody else might be mildly entertained or was a good way to keep my mind off what else I'm having to be doing at the time or commuting and so forth, that's good. But it's especially good if somebody said, you happen to have a conversation was the message that made me think of something that deal with an issue that I was having, and I'm glad you did it. And so I know that there's people that have made investments in regenerative agriculture, that have used small farms doing new technologies. I know people that were just looking for a nudge to make a plunge away from their current life into something else. And they hear stories of someone that did that. There's several stories that I've had of people that have been so-called successful in a business sense, and they've got good degrees, and they've made good money, but found they weren't very happy. And I think especially around the pandemic, people started working from home in some cases, and there was a number of people that were saying, gee, I don't want to go back to work, or I don't want to go back in the same thing, and I'm going to start farming on the side, or I'm going to start this or that. And the fact that they heard something that made them think, maybe I could do that. And sometimes that reaction that they have, where they say, it's kind of like, gee, I didn't know that they were using satellites on quarter-acre farms in India to help people, make more money when it's illegal for farms to be more than 4 acres, and things like that. And so some, I think, it just kind of like, well, that's interesting. Makes you think it's a big wide world, and there's a lot of things happening out there. And the fact, too, that, say, even consumers might be more curious when they're going to the local restaurant or the store, and when they're telling a story and saying, here's the farm that this came from. And I think that's a good thing, that it's making some people more curious about knowing their farmer. CSA programs that are establishing relationships with consumers. They have this, this mutual kind of a relationship that they're learning about their needs. You're finding a small farmer that maybe is getting by on a couple of acres, but in a couple of acres, he's making a couple $100,000 a year. Are you kidding me? Where in much of the country, you feel like the only way that you could succeed in farming, succeed as far as prosper in it, is to have 4,000 acres, but not necessarily the case. There's lots of journeys out there. I'm happy to share some of them. I'm glad that apparently sometimes it's useful beyond just being entertaining and informative.
Well, there's no question about that. I mean, what you're doing is, I think, very impactful. And it's one of the wonderful things that, I think that a number of the Heritage Radio Network programs or affiliated programs like yours end up doing. Like you said, it's not just about entertaining and informing, but, it's about sharing and learning and building bridges and building community, on air and off, which it sounds like you've done. This has just been such a joy, Rodger, to talk to you, learn more about you, share your background and your passion with our listeners here at Eat Your Heartland Out. If folks want to learn more about Farm to Table Talk, now, obviously they can, find you at heritageradionetwork.org and all the great places where you can find podcasts. But if they wanted to dig a little bit deeper, where could they go?
Well, my website is farmtotabletalk.com, and there you can find about 400, I think, in the archives of podcasts on almost any subject you want that related to this, because they can scan those too. But farmtotabletalk.com is a good place to start. And thank you for your interest in this and what you're doing. I'm really happy to have Farm to Table Talk be part of Heritage Radio Network now, and it's quite a community. And one of the things is I'm still getting used to all the folks that are on and all the programming that's on. I'm starting to think about how the stories I have complement some of these other stories that are out there, and especially your journey. And so I really appreciate this chance to visit with you, and thanks for being so curious. I feel a little guilty for talking so much about myself, but
no, that is exactly what you're here for. I mean, and it's, obviously it is a double excitement and pleasure for this show, one that is focused on food and culture in the American Midwest. Part of that, the anchor of food is agriculture, as you well know, and with your roots being in the Midwest and so much of your career being in the Midwest as well. It really, I couldn't think of a better person to, come on and introduce again to our listeners who I think share a lot of the same values, a lot of the same interests of your show, and I'm sure your listeners as well. So it's been a real pleasure. Thank you so much for taking the time. I know how busy you are doing your own show, so it means a lot that you would take some time to come and share a little bit here on Eat Your Heartland Out.
Well, thank you so much. And let's visit again sometime.
Anytime, Rodger. The door is open and the table is set. This is Eat Your Heartland Out with me, Capri Cafaro. After the break, I'll be back with another Heritage Radio Network host, Dana DiPrima.
This episode is brought to you by Visit Ithaca, where great minds meet the great outdoors. Check them out at visitithaca.com. Ithaca is known for outstanding dining and local cider, wine, and beer. And here's a quick word from one of these great local businesses.
My name is Steve Seelan from South Hill Cider. So I started making cider about 20 years ago, and I made cider exclusively from wild apples for the first 10 years. And then around 2014, I decided to plant some actual cider apples in an orchard to start cider production just like a small winery. We have a tasting room. You can see the orchard, you can see the valley, and we pour tastings of our ciders. We have about 20 different ciders that we make. So there are beautiful hiking trails and gorges and waterfalls all over this area. And in fact, we're located right on the Finger Lakes Trail, where in 15 minutes you can walk down to a 140-foot waterfall that's on a land trust property.
If you're looking for a weekend away, you can't do much better than Ithaca. Check out visitithaca.com for more information and get to where great minds meet the great outdoors.
Welcome back to Eat Your Heartland Out. I'm your host, Capri Cafaro, sharing the airwaves today with two other hosts who share the same commitment to creating content that captures stories of American farmers. Before the break, I was speaking with Farm to Table Talk host Rodger Wasson. But now I want to welcome Dana DiPrima. Dana is the founder of the For Farmers movement, and the host of the One Bite is Everything podcast. Dana, I am so excited that you took some time to join us here on Eat Your Heartland Out. You also have your own show. So, I know it takes a lot of time to do those sort of things. You got a lot of things on your plate. And so I appreciate you taking the time to be here with me and kind of have a co-show together as well today.
It's my absolute pleasure. Thank you so much.
Well, you have a wonderful background that brought you to a love of agriculture. And, part of introducing you and your show to our audience here at Eat Your Heartland Out is, getting that chance to share a little bit of your story about your journey. So what brought you into farming?
I think accidentally getting some chickens.
Oops.
Yeah, oops. They were, my daughter said, let's get some chickens. What do you think? She was 9 years old, and I didn't blink. I just said, sure.
Well, who can resist a 9-year-old's desire to get chickens?
I know. Exactly. So I had chickens that led to goats and donkeys, and I've always had a big garden. And I mean, that's kind of where it started. I started writing about some of the contrasts between country life and city life, which turned into a podcast where I was interviewing farmers. And it was called Something Different at the time. It was really exclusively about farmers. And I sort of had this aha moment where I was like, wow, we need our farmers. And they're completely invisible. People think that carrots come from a plastic bag. And even, farmers market shoppers, I think, are inconsistent at best. And, except for the dedicated ones, I don't want anyone to be upset. They're really dedicated. But I think that the connection between, our food, we're just further in a modern world from where our food comes from, and appreciating those folks that are making it happen 24/7, rain or shine, when no one's watching. And I felt very strongly that sort of that level of invisibility was not a good thing. And so my podcast sort of turned into a movement, and that's where I am now, I guess.
So I think you started out under a different banner, the Accidental Farm podcast. Like, as you said, you kind of created an accidental farm, and that kind of told your journey. How did you transition from podcast into movement and informing the For Farmers movement that you established?
So funny. So I actually started with Talk Farm to Me. It's my podcast.
Talk Farm to Me. Yes. Okay, even before that. Okay.
Yes. And then I did have a side podcast I did a little challenge of 100 days about my own farm, which was the Accidental Farm podcast. So you're not wrong there. But Talk Farm to Me, I mean, I think if you talk to farmers, whether, wherever that is, you will just realize that they are, the most hardworking people, and so smart and so capable and so doing it. Especially small farmers, I think, are very passion and mission based. They really want to create something really great. And they care very deeply about their customers and about finding more customers.
Absolutely.
So I just really sort of felt like, I mean, it's really that invisibility factor, which I'm sure there are plenty of professions that feel invisible. But I feel like with your food, the livelihood and the survival of small farms, which are, we're losing 1,000 small farms a day. So if we have the opportunity to bring our customers into a better consciousness about like who these people are, what you can learn from them, and, just really taking a look at what they're doing for you. They are creating, the food that you eat, but it's your health and your family's health. It's the deliciousness of those recipes that you're making for your family or for your dinner party. But there's so much more that is this ripple effect from having small farmers in your community. So your community is stronger. Those farmers are spending money locally. So economically, we're thriving. And they're taking care of the land. So, they're putting cows on the land. Those cows are eating plants. Those, the manure is feeding the garden. So there's, a lot of incredible benefits environmentally. And I think that people just don't realize the impact of, sort of this one small economic driver to, fuel all those things.
That we all need and that we all benefit from collectively. As you said, I mean, there's no real escaping the fact that we need food, and without farms, you're not going to get very far. I'm curious to know, because if I'm not mistaken, came from a corporate background prior to becoming an accidental farmer. Did you notice your own views or conceptions, misconceptions, lack of information? Did you see that change or evolve as you yourself got your boots dirty and became engaged, raising chickens and growing things and all of that?
Sure. I think I've always been somewhat food conscious. I grew up in a food conscious household. But I think the more you learn, the more you realize you don't know. So I don't know that I necessarily was connecting small farmers with as much as I see now, meaning, this is the farmer who grows the carrots was about as far as I thought. And I didn't really think about their role in the community in the same way that I do now.
Yeah. And you bring that perspective now to the work that you do. Tell me a little bit about, how, when you talk about, and I think it's very powerful, about that invisibility of, the small farmer or rancher, how do you help amplify those voices and connect with a wider audience to get folks to understand, that the role that small farmers play in getting food to the table, that they may not necessarily be aware of. You do, I think, two things. And I think maybe first talking about, amplifying the invisible, but then you do some, even more tangible, granular work directly with farmers. So let's talk first a little bit about, sort of communicating the stories of farmers to a wider audience.
Sure. Well, it certainly started with the Talk Farm to Me podcast, which has now evolved. But I think that even if you're talking to a farmer at a farmer's market, they don't have time. They're making change. They're getting you your bok choy or whatever it is that you're buying. So getting a farmer to step down off a tractor and, to sit with you and to really talk about their work and their life and what they're trying to achieve, that was one thing. So I was sharing those stories through the podcast. I have a weekly letter I share there. I'm on social media, on Instagram at XOXO Farm Girl. I share farmer stories.
You have great content, knowledgeable, fun, the whole nine.
Thank you. I think, the statistics behind the disappearance of our farmland, the economic components, the environmental components, what's going on in our rural communities and what we're paying for by not having, farmers present and, and thriving in those communities. So I really try to just dig into all of that. I would say sort of the signature program that gets the most attention for the For Farmers movement, beyond, sort of all that myth busting and storytelling, is a grants program. And that happens
which is so great. I'm sorry to interrupt you, but it takes so much work to put something like that together. And, the large impact you have for this small investment for these grants is massive. So tell our listeners about it, because I'm sure there are folks that want to, apply if there's an opportunity in the future.
Well, thank you so much. I really do believe that we're having a big impact with these small actions that lead to this whole, to this component of the movement. It starts with community members. It could be a partner, it could be a neighbor, it could be a social media follower, a customer. They nominate their farmers for a grant. And to me, that is check mark one against that invisibility component I was talking about. It is an eater, someone in a community who cares about their farmers, saying, you know what, I know how hard you work. So they get nominated and they have the opportunity to apply for a grant. The grants are not onerous. They're very simple. They're very straightforward. I think any farmer could answer all of the questions on the application short of doing a little bit of budget math. It happens very quickly. We do not like to delay. I have a panel of farmers and non-farmers from across the country. We evaluate those applications. Last year, we had 940 nominations and we funded 105 farmers. We've funded a total of 190 farms in 46 states. Our nominations come from all 50 states every time. So we're really building engagement there in terms of getting people to see the importance of their local farmers and taking that one small step to just saying like, okay, Farmer Bob, I'm nominating him, and Full Basket Farm, and here's their email. And they sort of start getting information about the grants. We have some workshops to help. And then that starts in October, and then grants are awarded in the first few days of December, the first Wednesday after Thanksgiving. And, another part of that people can contribute to is, they get the opportunity to donate $1 or more to grants. And I've had people laugh at me and say, $1, really? You're going to take my dollar? I was like, well, if you can afford more, I'd be very happy to take more. But my dream is that we have 1 million people each giving $1. That is what,
I love that.
That's what a movement looks like to me.
Absolutely. It's grassroots, it's engaged, and everybody is contributing and everybody is connected and invested.
The heartbreaker for me is when our farmers are donating $5 and $10. That it kills me every time. So, so we're spreading the word about that. We've raised more money every single year. And we have another grants program that's a little bit different that happens in February. It's called Love for Farmers. And it's really a gratitude program. It's love and thanks for farmers during the month of love. So
what better way?
Yeah, we put hearts all over it. But basically, similarly, you submit your farmer's name and address. We send them love in the form of, hey, you have a secret admirer. We have volunteers across the country who volunteer to write handwritten postcards to farmers. I give addresses and postcards with stamps on them, and they send them out. They are the sweetest things. I'm not even sure who's benefiting more. I think the volunteers are so over the moon about taking this opportunity to stop and to thank their farmers, even if they're in a different community. It's very powerful. And then, and this is the part that farmers hate, but they're invited to submit a 30-second video saying what they would use like a grant or a project stipend for. Because they hate videos, we have a little tutorial, but also just really try to share, that this is a real opportunity. If you can get comfortable in front of the camera, then you get to go and talk about, your adorable lambs that are on the ground or your incredibly delicious radishes. And it's a really great marketing tool for small farmers that I've seen a lot more small farmers get into, the sort of free social media space where they can communicate with their customers. And then we open those videos to a People's Choice Award. So instead of us deciding, we let...
And is that part of the Love for Farmers campaign then?
Yes.
Okay.
It's all extended there. But this year we had 20,351 votes. So we're pretty excited about that, that people are catching on and want to, show up for their farmers and vote for their projects. So those are the grants. That's the grant side. And we funded, like I said, we're in 46 states. We've got some great farmers that we have funded in the heartland. And I have I think about 25 that are in what I consider the heartland. I imagine you do too, but Alabama, Arkansas, Kentucky, Texas, Tennessee, Missouri, Mississippi, Louisiana. not in alphabetical order, but yes.
No, of course. No. And I think if folks want to take a look and learn about the farmers that have received these grants, you can find it on the For Farmers Movement website, forfarmersmovement.com/meet the farmers. And there are tons of profiles. And I just see, a few come up here, that are, in the immediate Midwestern region, places like Illinois, like Missouri, diverse types of farming. I mean, it's really, wonderful that you have such a wide reach and that you're so committed. And so the stuff that you do, again, I just feel like you put a lot of thought into it, and it enables folks to really better understand and strengthen that connection between the food that they eat and where the food comes from. And I want to talk to you about something that you had mentioned to me off air, which was I think it's called Walk a Mile in a Farmer's Boots, which I think is just a great idea. Tell me a little bit more about that initiative and when that's going on.
Thank you. Yeah. I think that's what we're trying to do here with everything is like, let's all walk a mile in a farmer's boots. Let's understand what they, how they live, what they do, what kind of struggles they face. And I just thought okay, well, our farmers, especially in urban centers, are in our farmers market. So let's do a community walk around our farmers market and let's shine a spotlight on our farmers in a different way than on your regular Saturday farmers market. The plan is to have a walking path, have folks cooking, do cooking demonstrations with what the farmers are bringing to the market. Have a morning, pancake jamboree, tractors, music.
Love it.
Kids, dogs, all of those things. And we're partnering for our pilot program with the Minneapolis Farmers Market in Minneapolis, Minnesota, which is one of the biggest and oldest farmers markets in the country. And all of the funds that we raise through registration or from walkers going out and getting sponsorship from their friends for the walks that they're doing, 80% of that will go to local farmers in the Minneapolis area. And the other 20% will just go into the national pool. And, we're figuring out how to define local at the moment. Their market is 150 mile radius, but we may be, considering that sort of tri-state area, knowing that, we have to get enough applicants in there. So.
Of course. And if folks want to participate in this, how could they find that information?
Well, it's not live on the forfarmersmovement.com website yet, but it will be come closer to event time. We're still working with the farmers market folks on the route. There's some construction issues. So, we're just working through some of the details, but it's very simple to participate. It's $30 a person. You get a hat, you get to walk, you get to be with the community, have some great food. And according to the folks at the Minneapolis Farmers Market, they are not weather shy. So we're rain or shine or snow.
We're pretty hardy folk here in the Midwest. It's a little bit of anything isn't gonna scare us off. That's for sure.
Yeah, it's happening at the culminating day of National Farmers Market Week in August, on the 9th of August.
Well, I'm going to do my best to actually get out there. So I'm going to keep my eye on your website and
Fantastic.
Whatever information that you put out there, whether it's on your Instagram or on the website, wherever it might be, because I'm not close, but I'm not far. And Minneapolis and the region are great. I got some friends there, and I think they would be more than excited to be engaged as well.
Thank you.
So, hopefully I'll be able to make it out there. Is there anything that you would like our listeners to know about your show that is also affiliated with Heritage Radio Network, which is One Bite is Everything?
Well, there are a lot of really incredible guests that I have had the privilege of speaking with over the last 5 years. I have an interview out with just today with Dr. Marion Nassel, who is a world-renowned nutritionist and kind of a tough she's a tough cookie. She looks at things through a very critical lens, and she has a lot to say about what's going on, from the government and politics, because she's very involved in food and politics, but also, just questioning things out there and seeing how we can do better in terms of our food. So experts like her, I try to do a policy recap of what's going on with your food once a month. I have a monthly local food challenge, and part of that plays out on the podcast. So I try to give something for everyone. Maybe you don't have time for a 45-minute episode, but you have time for a 10-minute one where you can really understand what's going on with your food. And I think the whole idea is that food on our plate, it obviously was created by someone, but it has an impact on your community. And all of the For Farmers movement is centered around the idea that you, as an individual, do not have to reconfigure your entire life to make a difference. Mm-hmm. One small action, whether it's nominating a farmer or donating $1 or replacing your industrialized yogurt with a local yogurt from a farmer that you go and have the intention to meet, any of those things make a big difference. And so with the For Farmers movement, and even with the One Bite is Everything podcast, there are always opportunities to take one little step that's not going to hurt you and your life in any way, but is going to make a big difference in someone else's.
Small steps, big impact. Dana, you are an inspiration to us all, and hopefully our listeners here at Eat Your Heartland Out will join the For Farmers movement and be part of that small change with big impact. Thank you so much for taking the time out of your busy schedule to be here with us.
It was my pleasure. Thank you so much. And I know that the farmers that we have supported would be, just so happy to hear that that you're celebrating this, because I know they're, part of promoting getting new farmers into the fold. And it's really important that we all do a little bit.
Absolutely. Thanks again.
You've been listening to Eat Your Heartland Out. This episode was produced by me, Capri Cafaro. Our audio engineers are Liam Warner and Armin Spengen. Theme music by Jason Shaw. You can learn more about the show by visiting heritageradionetwork.org/Eat Your Heartland Out. Eat Your Heartland Out is powered by Simplecast. Thanks for listening to Heritage Radio Network, food radio supported by you. Keep in touch at heritageradionetwork.org/subscribe.
I'm Katie Osuna, and I'm the host of Copper and Heat Radio, a 2-time James Beard Award-winning podcast about the forces that shape our meals. I started this podcast back in 2019 when I was working in Michelin-starred restaurants and noticing all of these social interactions around me. I had a lot of questions about the culture of restaurants and the systems we operated in.
I think the restaurant world's in for a reckoning.
Restaurants are slow to change because everything's made on the smallest margins.
Value is completely arbitrary, right?
What began as a podcast to process my way through working in kitchens as a woman has grown.
If the conversation is a crackdown on the border, then do you want a $30 burger? Because that's one of the consequences of this.
There's just a certain financial reality to making certain businesses exist. And there's a reason that delivery didn't exist in a lot of markets for a lot of years. And it's because it's incredibly low margin.
How a cuisine climbs in prestige and value. This happened to Japanese cuisine. This happened to Italian cuisine right in front of our eyes.
Listen wherever you get your podcasts. And now on Heritage Radio Network.